Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christian Colley. His name is James McLean, and you are watching Kasterborous, the 500th-ish edition. If you've been paying attention, if you've seen any of the stuff that I posted recently or listened to the last podcast, you'll know that we think we're at episode 500. We're roughly in the zone of 500. It might be in a few weeks' time. It might even actually be this one. The numbering system is a bit awry, a little bit like unit dating in the 1970s and 80s and 60s in Doctor Who. We don't really know when it's taking place.
Or is unit dating absolutely accurate and it's the rest of the cosmos which is just slightly skewed, you know? Or do we look at it the wrong way around?
Where does that leave 500-ish then?
I think the point is that, like the way that we do this podcast with limited research and limited effort, our numbering system has limited research, limited effort. It felt sympathetic to just how we roll these out, which again, and as we've been talking before we started this show, might be something we cover in thinking about, like talking about podcasts in general, is, you know, how does that style and format fit with that sort of legacy of where podcasts, where we were when we started and where we are now. And also, I guess, how this podcast has changed in how we do it.
Yes. I mean, it has changed a lot and it has evolved. And I think early on, and we'll talk about this another time in more depth, but early on, it was very much a case of record and put it out. We weren't really interested in numbering systems or even regularity. I mean, certainly when me and Brian did it, for the first 8 or 9 episodes, it started in 2007, and we just did it we did 3 episodes in 2007, a couple in 2008, and a couple in 2009, and we were doing it as just a side project from the main Kasterborous.
Well, this is it, and the main Kasterborous is no longer the main project, so there's an inversion there. But yeah, so I think it's something to talk about. And the way that we talk about this 500-ish is to sort of have a few, I don't want to call it celebrations, because that's almost like having a big birthday party. Everyone's invited, but no one actually really is interested in the person who's having the birthday. And so people are mingling around. Well, there's lots of big celebration of this person they don't particularly have that much interest in. We're aware that it's not a massive deal in the lives of the reader, of the listener / watcher / audience, but equally, it's not that big a deal to us either, really, because it's interesting. Yeah. And I think there's things it generates that we can talk about.
Yes.
But I don't think we can either pretend that it's like some sort of an amazing landmark of pride or shame. It's just, is. Well, you know, when you think 2007. But again, I think this is, you know, in terms of where ourselves and you, the listener / watcher, have a relationship, I think it is kind of interesting because it talks to an ongoing process, and where podcasts are now is very different to where they were then. You know, this podcast has slipped, and we'll talk about this in more detail, from like an artisan era, a very sort of artisan golden age of podcasting as a way of, it's like everything with the internet, isn't it? It starts off with something like a humble and exciting and unexplored space where these kind of started, to where we are now, where podcasts are like a real leader in media communication. So everything has shifted in that period, and yet we're still bumbling along. So yeah, I think 500-ish is something to maybe not celebrate, but certainly talk about.
Yeah. So a couple of things to get out of the way first. We are obviously... a lot of this is going to be kind of reliant. Excuse me. Reliant probably isn't the right word. There's going to be a hook to this, and that's the Kasterborous archive on the Patreon. And I spoke to Brian Tonover a few days ago for some material for some of these podcasts that we're talking about now, and he has given us some interviews that he conducted at conventions that have not been heard. They haven't been shared online or anything like that. Certainly not widely, maybe shared with a few people or whatever. But so he's given us those. They're going to be going into the archive. There's various other things. I have in my hand a piece of hard drive which has got lots of the old Kasterborous material on it. It's got forums on it. It's got various backups, And so that has got some material in it that I'm going to be reviving and adding to the archive as well. Excuse the noise, it's a heavy old thing. And so that is going to be a big part of it, because I think James and I were talking, and you'll have heard this in the episode just before Christmas, about this whole thing of the internet that we have now is not the internet that we had sort of 20, 30 years ago. A lot of what was around then is gone. Whether that isn't the case, I mean, take Kasterborous.com, for example. That was full of stuff that's on this hard drive. Then it was sold. Two people, one of them was Philip Bates, were looking after it for the new owners. Then the new owners sold it. Now that event led to the creation of the Doctor Who Companion.com, which is fine. That's great. But the new owner who sold it onto whoever they sold it onto, it's changed hands. It's now a Doctor Who themed gambling site in Turkish. That's not really what I had in mind for it when I passed it on. So I mean, that's a great example. Websites get flipped, bought and sold all the time, and the original material gets removed. That's all lost. And then you've got the whole thing about, like, we've got newsgroups, we've got the forums, we've got like home pages, those your free serve or your AOL, that little bit of web space you have, they're all gone as well. So this whole thing, I mean, we can't get all of those back, but we can reinstate a lot of the key material that was part of Kasterborous.
And I think what is interesting about this is, like I was just saying to you, you can go to various resources on the internet where sort of older publications are stored, and there's a lot of interest in that. There's a lot of interest in, like, 80s exploration and nostalgia. Video game magazines, especially in the UK, were very unique and have a lot of interest. But I think we're not yet at that point where people are looking at the 2000s in that similar sort of way. I think it'll happen because the 2000s will be the nostalgia times for generations at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think what is interesting in the 2000s, which wasn't happening as much in the 80s, is that you've got a far more sort of like prosumer approach. There's a lot more sort of collaboration. There's a lot more the separation between productions and fans becomes far less distant and becomes more merged. So you do get, like, as you said, interviews which, like, Brian's got, which won't have been heard, which will have just as much merit as you'd get in a magazine in the 80s or the 90s, but doesn't have the framework or the popularity to be thought to be stored or archived. And I think that's what's kind of good about this, as we say, what we say about Christmas, is you're archiving stuff which is just as relevant as you'd find a magazine, because, Kasterborous was doing stuff like magazines would do. It was getting screeners, it was getting material, official material, it was doing interviews, it was doing commentary and thoughts, and all that stuff is all situated in that time as well, in 2000s, where Doctor Who was really big because there was nothing else. And we don't want to lose it. So again, we said this before Christmas, but I think it's just a reiteration why I think this is actually quite a meaningful project, and a difficult one, because everything is ephemeral. Nothing lasts, and we can never. I don't know if I said this last time, but I remember going to a film archive a few years ago, and they show where they've got all the cold storage. All the cans are kept at a sort of a temperature, a static temperature to keep them. But that's it's just fighting the inevitable. Eventually that goes, and people think, oh, well, you digitize it like they were doing, that will keep them secure forever. And it's like, well, it's only as long as you've got servers. It's all gonna go. So it's a fight, it's a battle, and I think it's a worthy battle.
Well, that's made me feel better.
Good. Yeah, that's how I felt when I was in there. And I was like, oh, this is actually fascinating, but really kind of sad that everything will just eventually go. It will have to, including this, thankfully.
Fair enough. It just it's the Trial of the Time Lord story. With the that small collection of books. What was the first episode of Trial of the Time Lord? That's series.
Mysterious Planet.
Mysterious Planet, yeah, with that small collection of books that they've built their civilization around.
Mm.
Well, What if
Yeah.
it's just a collection of podcasts?
That sci-fi concept sort of echoes out. I was watching the original series of Star Trek again. There's that one where there's a civilization which builds itself around a book of like gangsters in the 1920s, or and as a blueprint for a civilization, or Nazi Germany another. And it's just like these it's absolutely wild, these notions. But yeah.
So, where are we? So progressing through that. So if you're interested in joining us in this big 500-ish thing, there's a few episodes that we've got planned. As I said, I spoke to Brian Turnover, spoke to him for ages the other day. So that's going to be great to have him back on the podcast again. I'm not really sure. I know he was on a few years ago. We were talking about this. Neither of us can remember exactly when it was that he decided to stop doing the podcast. And looking through podcasts, I've seen him popping up in podcasts which I thought were after he stopped doing podcasts. So
yeah, he stopped pretty much when Chibnall took over. I think that was his point where he was like,
right.
I think it was Chibnall. This isn't for me, rather than Capaldi. I think he was still around when we were doing Capaldi, wasn't he? But there was an era of Doctor Who where he was kind of like, I'm a bit tapped out, I'm very busy at the moment, and this doesn't really speak to me anymore.
Yeah.
And then he did a few, now and then he came back, and I remember doing a couple with him myself, which was great. So yeah, I think it was the Chris Chibnall era where I think he was like,
okay, I think it might have been.
I
think it may have been between them.
Yeah, I'm wondering, because I mean, he did have a lot of. I feel awful talking about a third person. I think he always had a lot of frustrations with Moffat's era, so maybe it was a little earlier.
Well, we do have a little chat about that, which will be.
Cool.
We will be using at some point. So joining on the Patreon, that's going to give you first dibs onto all of that, and I recommend you also check out our Substack, because there is a bonus for joining the Patreon. I've introduced a discount, but you need to be on our Substack to get that discount, and it's a nice discount. Joining us on the Patreon will give you access to the Kasterborous archive. It gives you this stuff early as well, and ad-free, and you get the video version when it goes out as well. So you can actually see us talking to each other, which is amazing, I think. Like video calls, it's like Unit again. If you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and if you subscribe as well to whatever podcast service you're using, then because people are searching for the Kasterborous podcast in Google, but if you just like click a subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever, then you're just going to get it straight away. If you're not going to use the Patreon, then just do it that way. And if you leave us a review as well, that's great, because that means we can reach more listeners. And given that we've hitting 500 episodes, now is a great time to find some more listeners. So, James, what are we talking about today?
Why the hell have you brought that up midway through a podcast? Because we didn't talk about it beforehand. I don't know. What should we talk about today? Now we've made this great celebration, which has sounded very planned and rooted with...
Shit. We didn't actually decide what we were going to talk about. Oh, right. Okay. So this big bunch of podcasts that we're doing, as I said at the beginning, this is roughly episode 500. It might be 500. It might not be 500. We're going to do a group of episodes around this 500. And then we're going to conclude that with a commentary episode. And that from that point, we're just going to move on. And we're going to forget about celebrations and stuff. And, next year we're going to be doing it for 20 years. So what? Celebration, if you want to call it that, the commemoration, the big number 500, which is an opportunity for us to do something a little bit different with the podcast and talk about different things, and focus on the Kasterborous archive and what we're doing there. That is the key to this. That is what we're celebrating, commemorating, building on. So, did you think? Of course you didn't. Why would I even say that? But the whole notion of doing 500 of these, like when we started doing them together in 2011, because we were talking earlier about this kind of, not just the ethereal sense of it, but the side of podcasts being, and not in terms of producing podcasts, but in terms of doing a podcast about Doctor Who. It was extracurricular for the website, if you like. And now we're here 15, 16 years later, still talking about Doctor Who, mostly, or things related to Doctor Who. Excuse me. Now, I don't want to say, did you ever imagine we'd still be doing this in 15, 16 years' time and we'd reach episode 500? But, the fact that we've managed to mine so much conversation out of this whole idea, and yes, it's mostly to do with Doctor Who, and often Doctor Who is just like a starting point, and then we jump off from Doctor Who and talk about something else. No, I think it's fair to say that a couple of years ago, we could have hit 500 a lot sooner than we have. If you look at, there's 52 weeks in a year. Even if we just had 2 weeks off, if we did 50 episodes a year, we would have reached after 10 years, which would have been around 2021. But that was around the time of lockdowns and COVID. And while everyone else was going hard into podcasts during lockdown of COVID, we were doing them monthly for some reason. I don't know why. So I think really what I'm asking is, I don't know what I'm asking. What am I asking? How do you feel about it? I guess, at its core.
I like the fact that you've decided to make this landmark occasion the time where you actually start to break. And yeah, nice one. What do I feel about it? I don't know. I feel the journey a little bit in the terms of the journey that is less visual. I don't know how many people have actually come on during that period, have stayed for the whole thing. Invariably and unfortunately, probably, I have stayed for the whole thing. So I see the journey. And I see the journey, and I see the creative journey and the sort of battles we had against, moving away from the website, trying to find its space, trying to literally move beyond Kasterborous and try and reinvent itself and work with different audiences and against different challenges for audiences, and moving between that tension between never being particularly bothered about how many people listen, but invariably it's nice to know that people are listening, and that it's actually that there are numbers that are increased, because that just means it feels like what you're doing is meaningful, rather than if numbers decrease and you feel like, well, is what we're doing meaningful? So that sort of journey is what it probably means to me. And those sort of different points of that journey, as you say, like in lockdown where things changed, and how that impacts. But I also like as I said, I like the broad scale of it. I like thinking about it in a like historical sense, and how there's all these moments within cult TV history in the last 16, 17, or even 20 years, which this show has been a reflection or interrogation of, which I think that's kind of cool as well. If you say 20 years of it, you're like, if you're thinking the original show, you're thinking from An Earthly Child to the Five Doctors almost, that's how long this has been interrogating this show. And I think that is, I think that's fascinating. And again, like I said, going from an artisan era where people were just kind of doing podcasts who were specialized to subjects, and it was like a fun, quirky thing that people might listen on their iPod, to where we are now, where we are dwarfed, and a bit, in a weird way, a bit like the show that we kind of follow is that the market is so saturated. It's its relevance and visibility becomes far more questionable. Why do we do this when you've got Doctor Who having its own podcast, where you have massive companies, including the BBC, which can afford to do high quality podcasts with big names attached. Where you've got like Sophie Aldred now running her own podcast on her own memories, and interviews and the like. And
Peter Purvis.
How do you compete? If you consider it is competing, how do you stay relevant against that backdrop? And that's difficult, because, regardless of how good Sophie is, she's got access in a way that we don't. So, it's like, well, how do you, and why do we? And I don't know. And I think those sort of questions come up. And I don't think that means, I think it would be extremely arrogant to say that, well, if we don't have the relevance of Peter Purvis and Sophie Aldred, there's no point of what we do. The fact people listen to this means that there is point to what we do. And we've always made that joke about the single listener. And I kind of think while it's a joke, it's the truth as well. If you've got one person who is enjoying this, that's kind of cool. If you've got 2 or 3, 100, 300, or, in some cases, 5,000, 6,000, cool as well. I suppose for me, it's always just been the enjoyment of just having the opportunity to interrogate something which in a way in other spaces people wouldn't interrogate, or would just go, oh, shut up, stop overthinking, or
Yep.
just, and that's the pleasure, I think, for me. But yeah, and it's been an interesting journey, and the last couple of years have been interesting as well. I've enjoyed I've enjoyed the last couple of years where we've jazzed things up a little bit by having different people involved and trying different approaches. I think that's been good too. So yeah, that's where I am with it. I hope that's giving you some time to try and work out where the hell you're going next.
Well, the thing, I mean, the best thing to do would be to have Brian for this, and we talked about this a little bit, but it would be better to have all three of us talking about this at the same time, and that's that whole notion of what we did when we started the podcast, which was. It was an opportunity to talk about Doctor Who, but we were incredibly brief. Like, our first podcast was 10 minutes long. Mm-hmm. And in that time, we did silly stuff. We were very irreverent in a kind of old school, not taking the piss, but just not showing any respect to it.
Yeah.
And I know that continued on with you in a sort of different dimension.
Mm.
But it is something that we've moved away from.
Well, I think for me, part of it is, I mean, it was an era of, like, as I said, grassroots growth and a way to experiment and have fun, and a bit like how the 90s in the UK anyway, for like quiz shows and comedy became a place where you could acknowledge that you had no money, and that was part of the fun of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where podcasts were. It was an acknowledgement that, it was stunned that people might listen to this and not taking yourself too seriously. I think for my part, I liked at the time the idea of, really having a little more, again, this starts to sound, it's not an egotistical thing. The way I approached it was to have a little more of a persona. So I used to write for this one and another podcast you write for. I used to try writing very long, stupid, irrelevant introductions. I particularly like to do that when we had sort of like big names to interview. So when I was doing the other podcasts, and I would have like Chris Carter from X-Files, or, James Wong from Final Destination, or whoever, and write these ridiculously stupid long podcasts just to kind of show how little respect I had for. And that was kind of fun, but eventually it becomes tiring, because it's like, it's work, and you're like, does it really make any difference? And I think as podcasts progress and you start thinking, well, what is the core here? And the core here is probably you're not as funny as you think you are, but you have something to contribute still. And I think that's where it started to go. I don't know. I mean, because I don't think we've ever really made an effort to interrogate the audience to what they actually want. It's hard to say what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, no, we've never done that. I mean, obviously, we invite opinions and questions at all times. That's absolutely fine, and you can get in touch with us through the Patreon, or email podcaststerborous@gmail.com or editor@kasterborous.co.uk, or any of those things, or get in touch through the Substack. So those things, there's always an open door there, but we haven't. Yeah, I don't think we've ever done a poll or anything like that.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't even look for opinions. I mean, I spoke to one of our contributors from last year, Magnus, and they were like, yeah, I saw a comment just sort of saying, look, it's just a female version of James, or being woke or whatever. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I was like, I never saw it. And I thought that's again, it's interesting, because it's like, how is what we are doing translating to people listening to it? And as I say, it's not something I've ever paid much attention to, but it is. And because it's always so subjective, one person loves the Five Doctors, one person hates it, In a way, what people think individually is, and I don't mean this in a rude way, is fairly meaningless to actually the only way you can do it is by, as we said, poll, or ways of looking at a sort of larger number to get a rough idea of where the middle ground is, which you can't really get from an individual person. You can just get a flavour of what some people are thinking, which can be fun. But yeah, and I don't mind that. I mean, comments like that I think are good because it just shows that you are playing with your format a little, so you're not becoming too predictable and dry. And some people might enjoy that, and it might bring some people in, others might not. And that's the part of, trying different things.
Over the years, so, we did, we started off with like these sort of silly short things, and then James came on board and with his sort of like long intros, etc. And there's also that period where what was the thinking behind last time on next week's podcast with a KO? Was it?
That sounds like something I would have probably been doing back then.
Yeah.
This time on last week's podcast with a K. I think the funny thing for me is, I've probably mentioned it before, but with ADHD and dyslexia particularly, my working memory is really bad. So there's so much I do not remember. And so things like that sounds like me. Yes. I have a vague memory of it, but I don't. It sounds alien. I don't, and I'm actually now listening to it this week because I think part of it is that there's something that we both share is that there is a love of language, and in terms of like comedy roots, I've just been watching the first season of The Night Manager yesterday. Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry, the sort of Ben Fry and Laurie, where very much a lot of what they were doing in the late 80s, early 90s was this. A lot of it was a play around rhetoric, around language, and that's something we've always enjoyed. And I've always had a love of like P.G. Wodehouse and Douglas Adams, and I suppose Pratchett as well, and how you play with the sort of language. And I know we've said this before, and I think Brian's always agreed. One of my favourite lines from Douglas Adams, the whole the ships hung in the air in exactly the same way that Brickstone. That sort of stuff is great. And as I said, if you're interested in that stuff, just going back, I've been reading some of P.G. Wodehouse's newspaper pieces, and they're wonderful as well. And seeing him sort of take his language but apply it to what they're thinking at the time. And there's a lovely thing about detective fiction. And again, I've been doing some research and reading on it, and just how, at the early 20th century, how little value it had. It was seen as sub art. It was not seen in that way. It was like how I suppose today we consider content creation. It had that sort of level of like, people reading this, it's dumbing them down, it's mindless, it's so obvious. He talks about there's only 3 different detective types, and there's a newer one coming along. And it feels to me like he's taking a swing at Campion, actually.
Right.
This sort of the ineffectual detective sort of thing.
Right.
And it's interesting. Language and is a really interesting thing. And again, when we start looking at historically, and this is now a historical thing. I know it's only 15, 20 years, but that is, especially if you think like streaming only really hit home in 2013. Yeah. We're in the process of, and AI in the last couple of years, even as a visible point of discussion. Everything's changing so rapidly. It's fascinating to see where things were. I think it's, as we've said many times in this podcast before, especially with Doctor Who, it's even more obvious with Doctor Who because people will say, look at the viewing figures, it's terrible. And it's like, yeah, but you've got to look at the landscape. We're in such a different landscape now. It's incredible and absolutely fascinating. I've been watching Traitors on BBC One, and again, seeing this one of the few shows that the BBC has managed to capture young audiences in a way it hasn't before. And this season they've dropped down from the 9 o'clock slot down to 8 o'clock, clearly trying to capture more family audiences. And this sort of almost this, it's dying anyway, but this fighting swings that the broadcast is having to sort of demonstrate or enjoy or revel in irrelevance, which you couldn't have imagined back in 2007.
No,
We're in
crazy.
such different spaces, and where does Doctor Who sit in all that? It's a wild time, and I think it's kind of fun that you can get through things like the archive. You're getting the feelings and the opinions of essentially everyday people. People who are not embedded in the industry, who are not gaining or using it for promotion. I know, again, as so many podcasts are now, it's a really fascinating. It's just like, what did average people think about these shows at these times? And it will change.
Yes.
It is definitely changing. My opinions of some of the old Doctors of those times have changed since we recorded them.
Oh, yeah. I think mine have as well. Just to give you a quick, because James has mentioned the archive there, just give you a quick idea of what's in the Kasterborous archive at the moment. We've got the first Kasterborous magazine. There is a video from a Doctor Who Missing Episodes press event, which was contributed by Gareth Kavanagh. We've got some exclusive images from Voyage of the Damned, which were posted on Kasterborous briefly when that came. When did that come out? Voyage of the Damned, 2008? There is the lost... there's an interview with Pip Madeley, the content creator. Did a lot of stuff on Twitter. Has moved to, I think, mainly Instagram, I think, maybe Blue Sky, I'm not sure. And YouTube, and did very, very silly video. Great takes on Doctor Who and some other TV shows. We've got Splink, which is a video. Brian and myself talk about this in my chat with Brian. We did this video called Splink, which was based around Blink. So a similar notion, obviously Splink with a John Pertwee Green Cross Code campaign from the 1970s,
right.
Which is what the ridiculous acronym Splink. Who's the hell's going to remember? Even if you can remember the word Splink, you're not going to remember the words that it comprises of.
Yeah.
Insane. There's a Doctor Who press conference from the 2012 Doctor Who convention. It might be 2013, but the Doctor Who convention that was held in Cardiff around that time. And our live podcast at VarpCon as well was on there, the video versions of that.
Oh, wow.
And some footage. This was AI enhanced because the footage was recorded in sort of 2009 or early 2010 on a sort of potato phone camera. So I enhanced it a little bit with AI, which is the Doctor Who Adventure Games launch event, which was inexplicably held outside of Sheffield railway station in that plaza area. No idea why they held it there, other than it was a Sheffield-based studio that was working on it. But even so, I'm pretty sure there was somewhere else they could have held it. There was Daleks everywhere in the station and stuff. It was great. It was a nice carnival atmosphere. So that's what's in the archive at the moment, and there's a lot more to go into it. Just going back to what James was saying about changing things and not being able to remember things as well. I feel this is maybe an opportune moment for me to mention a project that I'm working on, which is called 10 Years Gone, which is based on this, which is the first volume of my journal, which I started writing in 2016. You can check, I'll put a link into it. If you're interested in what's happened over the past decade in the world, there's a personal take on stuff that's happened over the past 10 years. But what I'm doing, I'm time shifting it. So there's a time travel element to this. Each journal entry is published 10 years later, as it were. So already in this volume, I mean, this is 2016. So, you've got Brexit and you've got Trump, and there's other stuff as well. Also, early on, my grandma passed away as well. So that's it starts off with that in a weird sort of a way. And you were saying about that having, not really remembering stuff from back then or whatever. I didn't, most of the stuff in there, I discovered that I was concerned about dropping my grand's coffin. Completely forgotten about that, So I think, and I think maybe that feeds into what we are doing with these podcasts as well. I mean, they are all there for people to listen to and go back to. And you mentioned changing opinions on stuff. And there are changing opinions, and there's an evolution of how we talk about stuff as well. Early on, I'm very brief in my opinions about stuff. I've also got a very different voice. It's sort of like, hello and welcome to the podcast. I don't know why I was doing that. But yeah, so it all changes and it all evolves, and how we, our perceptions of things, and it's always changing.
I think going back to the whole thing about the ephemeralness of it, I feel really guilty listening to that, because I was thinking because we also, in it, as everything, as has been said in recent discourses, everything is shitified, that all these services that we have become worse for various reasons, not because they necessarily have to.
Because they're trying to do everything.
And they're trying to increase their money value. Yeah. So the argument is that Google deliberately gets worse with its search engines because it's realised that it can't maximise further profit from where it is. So it's got to make things a little worse to make it a little harder to find the things. So therefore, and it can do that because it's the only thing people are using to search with. These sort of logics. But I was thinking, because the other day I was going through one of my accounts and it's like 80% full, 90% full. And it's like, you've got to delete stuff. I remember I deleted like 3 days ago, footage of the event I went to in about 2014 where Ben Miller was talking on stage. Oh. And I just got rid of it because I was like, why? Well, I was thinking it's just sitting on my phone. Never look at it. It's just there. I need to make space because now I've got these limits on what I have. I can keep in this space. I could create another space, but then that's another place to. No one's going to need this, and so that I think is gone. And it's like that would have been good for the archive. Yes. And it's just this thing that. Yeah, we have all these storage spaces, but because they're limited and we just continually use them, so they're constantly filling up, stuff is going to be lost.
Yeah.
And where does that stuff go? So, these opportunities to try and archive that stuff is great. I suppose, and I don't know, this is off the top of my head, and you might disagree, but there might be, if listeners have something like that they feel would be really good in terms of Doctor Who to keep in the archive that we haven't, is that something to negotiate, contact you with, and see whether it has value to go in?
I don't see why not. If it's within, if it's Doctor Who related, then it's the sort of thing that we would have featured on Kasterborous.
Exactly. That's what something we feel like we'd like to preserve.
Yes, definitely.
Essentially, that you feel you'd throw out to, like me, to stupidly maximise space of a week before we talk about this. I feel so irritated about that. And say it's been sitting there for 2014, so 10 over 10 years,
13, 12
and
years,
taking up space, and just this last week, just like, I'm gonna have to get rid of it because I need to make space, and it's not even like it makes a massive amount of space change. It's like, oh god, but it's that whole point of why these archives are important, because our memories, our ways to store stuff is just filling up, and the way we store stuff is with companies which, and in all fairness to them, there is rational reasons in the way that we do this. Often we've got these free storage spaces unless you pay for them. There comes a point where you are going to have to pay for more if you want to keep more memories. Yeah. Where's that, and then what gets lost? What do we remove? It's an incredible age, and again, if we think about Google's growth in terms of where it is now, while we were Googling before 2007, that sort of push to Google being like a catch-all for, drives, emails, photos, that sort of space. That has, that's been on a similar journey, and we're now in that sort of space where we have probably far more photos than if we actually went and pruned, the amount of stuff taken up by stuff we don't get rid of. And I don't know, it's just such a wacky world, and I can just feel that it is so easy to lose stuff which is important, and the problem is that's because everything can be important.
It's distinguishing what is important now and what is just something you don't necessarily need, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's easy to make mistakes on that.
Yeah,
I mean, this is not a new thing. I mean, how many times have people thrown comics away or books away that they thought were irrelevant, and not simply about they find out that they're like an issue 1 of Detective Comics, more like it becomes something you look back and go, actually that was really interesting, I'd love to revisit that, but I didn't have space, so I threw it out. It's a weird, wacky world of knowledge sharing, retaining, and we are now trying to capture far more knowledge than you think. Before, we'd have a photo album. Photo album might have 2 years worth of photos, some holidays, some intel. Now, you've got thousands, perhaps in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. Several photos from the same hour of the day, and then the previous hour and the previous hour, etc., etc. Yeah, there's obviously you can put it on Facebook and stuff like that. Maybe you don't want to use Facebook. I don't particularly like using Facebook for much these days. My wife puts photos on Facebook to share with family and stuff, and I think that's about it. I use Google Photos for a lot of my stuff, but that's finite. And then, I'm constantly at 98%, just like deleting stuff and going back and finding stuff that is irrelevant, or can I put this somewhere else,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different ways that we store stuff. Google's just obviously one of the most obvious ones that people tend to use. But yeah, and Facebook has been one which has probably been kind of outmoded, but some people still do it, especially older people.
Yeah.
But even wherever, then it comes to the point of like, how do I manage it? And then I've got a job and I've got life, and where do I get time to manage all this stuff? And that's where stuff falls between the cracks. Yeah. I think archiving is just so fascinating and sometimes so relevant because, when we look at how, especially stories and fiction, reinvent our understandings of different times, these sort of artifacts are really important to get a sense of what they were actually like. I'm thinking of like how you could say how like the TV show of Father Brown or the 50s stuff, it reinvents what the 50s was like, or even like how Stranger Things kind of simplifies what the 80s were like. Or even, P.G. Wodehouse and Jeeves and Wooster simplifies what, certain how class structures in the 1920s were like. Sometimes it's just, we need to have these everyday stuff because it's the everyday stuff which we lose in these sort of big takes of what these eras were like.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that the people have. And again, so yeah, that's why I keep saying I think the archive's a great idea.
I mentioned Facebook a moment ago, and it's just, you're not alone in your room there, don't you?
What do you mean?
Well, I was in Facebook the other day. My dad shared something with me, and it was like this group called Objects That Look Like Faces. And there's a little guy over your left shoulder.
This one here?
Yeah, with like two eyes. I think one's a smoke detector, and then he's got a nose, and then there's a pendant lamp. Yeah.
Yeah. You did actually for a second genuinely terrify me.
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't know why. It's funny when you have those like microsecond thoughts where your brain amazingly goes through so many options that it doesn't. I know, like I think, oh my God, there's someone in my room and no one knows. But it's like, he said that. What does that mean? How could that be interpreted?
Yes.
Is there something in my shot that I'm not aware of? Is there what's going on? It's crazy how the brain is just so.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
it's all right.
But I'm seeing these things all over the place at the moment. Just mainly because you always see faces and things, don't you? And it's just a nice, fun little group, and I like fun little groups that don't get distracted with the day-to-day nonsense of running the world. And I think that's the great thing about a podcast like this, isn't it? He says, segueing in desperately, that we don't really get. There's nothing. Very little about what we talk about is affected by the real world. The day-to-day running of the world. I mean, it could be argued that the day-to-day running of the world is actually just a bollocky distraction anyway, and people are still continuing doing the things that they do from day to day. And that's just like background noise. I mean, looking in my journal, there's very little in it about anything political. It's there when it needs to be there in terms of elections, etc. But there's nothing. Everything else is about day-to-day life, and doing the podcast is very much around. We talk about each other. We talk about what we're doing at a very minimal level. The rest of it is talking about a TV show, or how that TV show affects other TV shows, or what it might have meant previously, etc. And those thoughts and those opinions, whilst they, as I mentioned before, they can evolve, etc., they are incidental to real life, but they're also, when it's something that you're really interested in, I think it's interesting how they evolve, but also where they sit in terms of the importance. For me, it's changed. So, and there's various reasons for this. When we started doing the podcast, when we started doing Kasterborous, I was very keen on Doctor Who. Am I less keen on Doctor Who now? I don't know if I'm less keen on the Doctor Who that I was keen on then, but maybe I'm less keen on Doctor Who as a whole. I'm happily watching, John Pertwee on UK TV episodes more than I would want to watch something that's modern. I don't think my affection for the older stuff has changed at all. And I realise there's several dimensions to what I'm saying here. But it is interesting how it kind of unfolds.
Yeah. I think we've always had an interest in keeping that focus on the show rather than expanding outwards. I feel in a weird way society is becoming almost like a feudal society back in the day, where there's a sense that people have, especially over the last 10 years, regardless of your political persuasions or interests, that change has become far harder to affect and is far harder to I don't know. It's just, I think you see people in power, and again, this is across politics, businesses, and you feel a sense that there's far less ability to create traction. That in a weird way, you start to realize that the world which makes sense and you can have meaning for is far more like your own spaces. And I think for a long time there was people thinking that we can change things, and then you realize actually the way stuff has changed now, it's made it a lot harder to change things. People in power do not step back from power through, unless there's a massive amount of that doesn't, and there's this argument that the customer is always right has now disappeared to the shareholder is always right. Loads of different, and it becomes to a point where, from my perspective, it's like talking about that stuff feels just vaguely irrelevant and slightly annoying. It's not, we're not people, we're not carriers of that message. We're not a political podcast. We're not a advocacy for any sort of changes, whatever we believe. And, there's no even argument that our own ideals align. We don't really talk about that stuff, and that's kind of a nice thing. I think in a world where everything feels very binary, very fractured, sort of narrowing down and trying to step away from that, because it is just a lot of stress and discontent when you go down those paths. It's nice to just not do that and actually go in a space which does unite people to some degree, or certainly you can ignite people in having a critical conversation about something. So we might not both like the same show, the same episode, but we can talk about that. When people decide that they don't like a political party in power or something that some person, something that's happening across the world, very rarely is a sort of like a comfortable middle ground there. Yes. So why, in a sense, for podcasts, I feel like it's like know your territory in a weird way. If you're a politics podcast, then you should be talking about politics. But if you're not, and it's not something which you feel is particularly enjoyable to talk about, and I think that's nice, because as you say, it means that you start to create your own space that people can come and join. When they come and listen to us, they know that we're not here with any and it's not just like, when I'm talking about politics, I'm not even talking about like grand government politics. I'm talking about like Doctor Who politics, that we're not interested. We've never been interested in that sort of clickbaity, looking for to stir the pot to get the clicks. So you come here, you're going to get two middle-aged people probably talking about Doctor Who in a way which we like to hope is fair and meaningful, and that's where the interest is.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost a post-episode pub chat without the alcohol, isn't it? It's like two people talking about something, if it's an after-show episode where we've watching something and discussing it, or it's a commentary where we're just two people sat watching the same thing, as has become very common these days, people watching things and talking about it at the same time. So yeah, there is something I wanted to mention earlier because I'm conscious of the time. I've been doing a bit of research, James, and it seems, and I'm not one for portentous declarations of importance or anything, as you know, but I think we might be the longest running British Doctor Who podcast.
Yeah, that'd be funny.
Yeah, it would.
It's funny where it's that sort of. It's not an award for quality. It's kind of like the award for trying sort of thing. It's like
Yes.
You didn't run the race fast, but you managed to get to the end.
Yeah.
It's the people who that old thing to win a car where you've all got to touch the car and it's the last person left touching the car is the winner.
That,
and it's like you're not won really. You've just stayed there the longest. There's no skill. It's a bit like, when you get apps like things like Duolingo and, the way they reward is simply about, is not about the quality of what you do, but the time that you spend doing it, because for them, that's what they want. That's the metric. And that's what we've done in terms of the sort of Duolingo metric. Yeah, we're great. We've been just, we'd be acing that if this was somehow comparable.
Yes. So, to wrap things up then, so over the next few weeks, we're going to be delivering some episodes to you in this format and in video format, and some new items are going to be going into the Kasterborous archive. I do have to just underline that putting items in the Kasterborous archive ranges from very simple to quite difficult, because in some cases it means setting up a web server on my PC and then kind of like making that software work, and then running a database, etc., and then removing information from it and then using it. So that's going to be quite tricky. But there is one thing that comes to mind, and we were talking about something that James mentioned earlier on with lost things, and one of the things I thought that I should put in the archive was, and again it was in Sheffield, there was an event I went to many years ago. It was Barry Lett's last public appearance at a religious themed convention, because it was around the notion of sort of like faith and spirituality in Doctor Who, and there's all the stuff that Letts did with the Buddhist elements and that sort of undercurrent with poetry stuff. So I think that it took place in a church of some description in Sheffield, and I do have some very muddy, potatoey photos from it, but I'm 95.9% certain I also wrote an account of the day, which is gone. No idea where it is. It's going to be on this hard drive, so I really want to get that up published as well, because I think that's quite an interesting one. So there's lots of stuff like that I think we can include in the archive moving forward. So there's we're going to be talking again, James and myself, and there's the chats between myself and Brian as well. There's a possibility of some other people being involved, but also James and myself are going to conclude this sort of 500-ish celebration feature hook with a commentary on the 500th episode of Doctor Who, which you probably all know is episode 1 of the Armageddon Factor. So that'll be interesting, because we haven't really looked at the key to time in a long time.
No, not at all.
If at all, yeah. So
no. Yeah, and I have lots of interesting memories of it, because I remember, like buying the VHS as they came out. Yeah. And, rather nice packaging at the time as well. So, yeah, yes. I have lots of interesting memories of it. And it was the first time I'd seen any of it too. So, yeah. It'd be interesting to revisit.
It was a strange one, because it never really got... It's in a period of Doctor Who which was very, very popular, but no one really talked about it. It was kind of largely overlooked. I mean, you'd get featured in Doctor Who magazine, such. Well, when people, when Doctor Who night or the 30th anniversary or whatever, there's very little key to time mentioned in either of those things. It wasn't really something that seemed to be in the public consciousness, despite the fact it being on at a time when Doctor Who was like prime time.
So yeah. Wonder if it was. Well, we'll talk about it when we do it.
Maybe memory hold in some way. Who knows? So I'm just thinking to myself that maybe it was overlooked by something else Douglas Adams was doing. But anyway, so we'll leave it there for this week. We will be back with some more chats and discussions over the next few weeks to, I don't want to say celebrate. I keep saying celebrate, and that's the wrong word. To commemorate, punctuate, maybe 500-ish episodes.
To interrogate
500-ish episodes of Kasterborous. That's all from us today. Until next time, it's goodbye.